name is Daria Wormley. You all are here because you wanted to know more about grants. This is Grants 101, everything you need to know about for communities. This is going to be a very intro-level grant education workshop. So this will just be a great place for you to get started. If you're new to grants, this is a great refresher if you've experienced in grants but kind of want to hone your skills. And then we're going to have ample time at the end for questions, Q&A, and that kind of stuff. We're an intimate group, so you'll get some more one-on-one attendance time, which is great for you all. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. So first, who am I? Who is this girl standing up here telling you about grants? My name is Daria Wormley. I'm originally from Chicago, but I went to Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, got my bachelor's degree in speech communications with an emphasis in public relations. At the senior year, I decided I don't want to do PR, but I was working in housing, and I said higher education seems like a solid career, and so I went and got my master's in student affairs and higher education at Texas State. Once I graduated in 2016, I just continued to have my career in higher education in Texas. I just jumped from university to university working. I worked at the University of Texas at Arlington. I worked at Dallas College. I've worked in everything from retention, admissions, housing, academic advising, you name it, I've done it in higher education. I even taught a high school equivalency class for math, for students learning math and trying to get that high school equivalency. So I've done a little bit of everything. Higher education is how I got introduced to grants. I was working in a grant funded program called TRIO. If anyone is familiar with TRIO, people are mostly familiar with Upward Bound, which is the high school version. And so TRIO overall is an umbrella program, and there's 8 programs underneath that. Upward Bound is the high school version. There's a middle school, high school, college, and graduate level program within TRIO. And so each one of those are placed. I was in TRIO SSS, which was the college version. The point of all TRIO programs is to get first generation students from point A to college graduation. So my job at the community college was to get our community college students from admission to graduation and transfer to a 4-year university, because graduation is required from a 4-year institution with TRIO. So in working in that TRIO program, I was just working on the grant management side of that. So at the end of that grant cycle, that's when my director came to us and said, it's time to rewrite the grant. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Basically, that means it's time to reapply for our funding. And if we don't get our funding, we don't have jobs. So of course, we got to work writing. And we started writing, and that grant was awarded for $1.4 million at Dallas College for the 2020-2025 academic year. That was my introduction into grants. And so since then, I've raised $17 million in grant funding since 2022, a variety of federal applications, nonprofits. I've done federal, I've done foundation, I've done every type of grant there is out there, probably not every type, but I've touched a little bit everywhere, municipal, state, all of the things. And more importantly, so I also have a 67% success rate, trying to make sure I hit all my targets, meaning that of the applications that I've submitted, 67% of those applications have been awarded, which makes up the $17 million that I've raised. And the most important point on this is that I'm a BTS army. I am a raging K-pop stan, if you don't know what that means. K-pop has kind of taken over the world. If you have small kids in your life, you've probably heard of K-pop Demon Hunters, the movie that took over and they won a bunch of Grammys. That movie is like making fun of me, K-pop stans, and our love for K-pop is pretty hilarious. And so when I watched the movie, I was like, why are you talking about me? But also I love it. So that's just a little fun fact about me. And BTS, fun fact, is their music is what inspired me to step out and start my own business. And so I always include that tidbit about me, because as silly and fun as it is, music is what inspired me to do what I'm doing now. So why grants matter more than ever? So you don't have to watch the news to see what's going on in our country right now, in our cities right now, right? And grant funding is a critical part of that story and that piece. Public funding is shifting, delayed, and disappearing. So grant funding since January was one of the first things to be attacked and shut down. Federal funding agencies were told, particularly in the Department of Education, that they had until 5 o'clock the same day to pull down all the funding that they needed for that fiscal year, or it was basically not going to be available. So the money that you would use to pay staff, the money that you would use to do any kind of basic funding of your programming would no longer be available unless you were able to pull all of that down. That was an unprecedented move that we've never seen in the grant world before. Since then, the grant world has continued to be attacked. There are federal funding dollars that have not been released that were promised in 2024. There are programs that have been shut down and we don't know what happened to those dollars. And so it's important for our communities now more than ever, beyond getting funding for your organizations, but it is a social justice necessity that we are educated about grants and how they're operated, particularly now that we're like, what happened with the funding and what are you doing with that? And why is there a certain organization all of a sudden getting all these millions of dollars of funding and sign-on bonuses, but now you're closing multiple $1.4 million programs across colleges and universities across the country? Interesting. Okay. Community needs are increasing while resources shrink. So the communities that are most in need, the communities that are most vulnerable are also the organizations that have had their funding cut. And so those communities that already needed the help that they did have the resources that those organizations have now been cut or eliminated. Nonprofits have closed at a record-breaking rate in the last year due to a lot of the grant funding changes. And for example, there is a list of DEI words that you cannot use in your grant applications now that will automatically boot it out. So if you say anything like, I would like to serve a diverse group of African American students, your application will automatically boot it out now. And so those are some of the things that you need to be aware of in submitting your grant applications to even be considered for funding now. Grants are one of the few tools that can bring in new money without debt. It is critical, particularly for our nonprofits and small businesses that are usually founded and run by those vulnerable populations, that we operate in a way that we minimize or do it so debt-free. And so when you're starting a small business, because there are small business grants out there, or you're running a nonprofit, the best thing that you can do is try to get as much money that you don't have to pay back. And so grant funds are a great way to get revenue without having to incur any interest or have a funder that's calling your phone looking for you to pay something back. Access to funding shapes who gets to stay open, grow, and survive. And so what we've seen, when you look at larger nonprofits that operate almost like corporations, those nonprofits have the revenue and they have the high net worth individuals to back them when grant funding goes awry. So they've been able to withstand the storm. And so those are also usually nonprofits that are run by the communities that are not in a place of being at risk, right? And so when you look at the discrepancy, it's kind of clear across the board. It's the same story being repeated over and over again, just kind of seasoned differently. There are drastic differences in who's going to be able to sustain this wave of funding changes and the consistent day-to-day grant changes. It's already impacted who remains open and who gets served. So that's why it's important. Grants are more important than ever now. What you'll walk away with today. Today you'll walk away with a clear understanding of how grants actually work. Basic language that understands how do grants work, how do they function, what do they do, and how does it apply to you. Language to talk about funding. There is vocabulary that goes with grants. Like any other profession, like any other thing, there are vocabulary words, and it helps you to speak intelligently, particularly if you're speaking to funders or are trying to hire a grant writer, to be able to speak intelligently about the grant writing process. Insight into what funders are really looking for. And so funders, we kind of look at them sometimes as like these institutions or kind of these mystical rich people. The funders are also sometimes people too, particularly our high net worth individuals or our small foundations that are run by families. So having an understanding of the kind of funder that you're applying to, who they are and what they're looking for is also hugely important to grant funding. Grant funding is just as much grant writing as it is relationship building. And so we'll talk more about that today. Practical next steps. So things that you can actually tangibly do by the time that you leave here today. You'll walk away with like, okay, I can tomorrow go do that, or next week I can go and schedule and do a thing and do that. So what grants really are and what they are not. So first, what they are. Money to help nonprofits, education, and community organizations. As I spoke about before, it's really great when organizations can get money that they do not have to pay back. And so grants usually are for nonprofits, educational institutions, or some kind of community-led organization. There are grants for small businesses. That is probably the smallest group of grant awardees. Usually people work with nonprofits or education when they're trying to get grants. Competitive funding tied to outcomes and accountability. So now it's beyond, you have to speak to beyond what your mission is. Everybody's mission is good. Everybody's doing something that's going to help the community. What are your objectives and how have you already started to execute them? Because your grant is going to ask you what your objectives are, and then that grant is like a contract. It's going to hold you accountable that those objectives are what you're going to carry out. So do you already have objectives in your mission, in your vision, and are you actively carrying those things out? And can you speak to those things? Do you have data to back those things up? Are you tracking those things? How are you tracking them? Is it in an old spreadsheet, or do you have a CRM that's tracking that data? How accurate is it, and are you using it? And so in outcomes, that's the first half of that. Accountability is the other half. So funders now ask for a lot of annual performance reports. So that's the report that after they give you the check, the next year they're like, okay, so what did that check do? What did you do with it? How were you a good steward of it? And being able to speak to what you were able to do beyond giving a general paragraph of how great that one program was. What was the impact? How many people showed up? After those people showed up and got whatever resources, did it do what it did, what it was intended to do? Did you follow up to see if it was done what was intended to do? Do you have assessments and processes in place to be able to to have the story, but have some data to back up and breathe life into that story? So funders want to see, do you have the objectives, and then do you have, can you report on those outcomes in a quantitative and a qualitative way? Long-term relationships. So relationship building and fundraising is huge. And so if you are a part of our organization that's trying to fundraise, whoever your funders are, you should be going to their galas. You should be going to the conferences that they're going to. You should be a part of the associations that they're a part of. So for example, I'm a grant writer, so I'm part of the Grant Professionals Association. I go to their summit every single year and connect with other grant writers to make sure that I'm on par with what it is that we're doing current day. But then also to find clients, I will go to a TRIO conference. I go to the TRIO State Conference every single year so that I can meet with other directors, because those are my clients, right? Those are the people that are managing the grants and will eventually need me to step in to write those grants. So I'm always thinking about how do I develop myself and how do I put myself in a position to be around the people I need to be around. So think about who your funders are, where they are, and intentionally position yourself to be in their spaces, in their physical, in-person spaces. Also make sure you're in their virtual spaces as well. I can't tell you the amount of nonprofits that do not have active LinkedIn pages. That is such a mistake. That is such a mistake if you do not have a LinkedIn. If you do not personally have a LinkedIn that is active, that you're updating on a regular basis, and your nonprofit organization does not have a LinkedIn that they are updating on a regular basis, you are doing yourself a disservice in funding. Funders are looking at your social media pages. They want to see the evidence of what you're claiming that you do. Well, if you're claiming that you've been doing this for the last 3 years, but you only have the last year and a half on LinkedIn, what are we doing here, right? And even if your application is great, I have another application that's also great who has an updated LinkedIn with all of the stuff that matches up with the application. The application says they've done these things on their LinkedIn. It matches up. It's not a requirement, but it's nice to have that there. Also, on your applications, they ask for your social media accounts, and that's why. They ask for direct links to your Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and whatever other social media that's appropriate. Whoever your audience is, whoever you're looking to serve, you should have a social media in that space. And so if your audience is on Instagram, you need to be on Instagram. It shows the funder that you're serious and that you're well informed about the people that you're trying to serve. That they're not just giving a check to someone that is hoping to make an impact. They're giving a check to somebody that knows they are going to make an impact and have detailed, specific information about who they're serving, and social media is included in that. So building your long-term relationships is something that you need to be doing both in person and virtually. What grants are not? Free money. The reason grants are not free money is because there is a level of investment. You don't have to invest money, right? You don't have to pay it back, but you do have to invest your time in education. You all are here today. This is an investment. I'm sure that gas was not free to drive here tonight, right? Like, even if the workshop is free, the gas is not free. You could be at home on the couch with your socks on, right? So it's an investment in time. It's an investment in finding the team to come together to write the grant, particularly if you're talking about a federal grant or a municipal grant. You'll want to have a team of 3 to 4 people, and so it's time investment in bringing that team together, even if they're a team of volunteers. It's also, you may need to invest in a professional grant writer. Some nonprofits can't afford a grant department. Like, a lot of nonprofits will have a full grant administration department. Some of those nonprofits can't afford that. So they budget for a contract grant writer, and that is how I get my bread and butter. They'll contract a grant writer where they don't have to pay for benefits and all of that, but they get a quality grant writer with the expertise, and they get all of their grant stuff done at a price that they can budget and afford, right? So it is not free money, because there is going to be some level of investment, whether you teach yourself or you invest in professional development for your staff, or you actually hire a professional to come on and do it for you. Emergency cash or quick fees. So if you're looking for a quick financial solution to revenue, grants are not it. Grants are a marathon. It is a long-term thing. If you know you want to get involved with grants, you want to do so a minimum of 6 months to a year before, at least a year before you need it. I would say 12 to 18 months before you need it. Grants are not, I sometimes will get small businesses or inexperienced nonprofit leaders that'll come to me and say, hey, we're like 3 months from closing and we need grant money right now. Grants don't work like that. I can write up the grant and have it done. Like, say I did a rush job and wrote up an application and had it done in a week. That the deadline still has to be, if the deadline isn't until April 24th, they're not looking at it and awarding it until after April 24th. So I can fill out the application, do all the things. Let's say I fill out in a week, and the following week is the deadline, and they're going to review it. The review process can be anywhere from a month to 6 months, depending on how many applications they get and what their process is and how many grant reviewers that they have on their team. And then if it's a small foundation, they may not have a lot of grant reviewers on their team, which extends that time. And then there also may be multiple levels. So once you get the grant out, submit the grant, I've seen sometimes where they're supposed to pick somebody and the applications are so strong, they have a short list and they ask you to submit a slide deck. So now you have to do a presentation for the funder, and you have to come in person, and it can be, and if you've done anything with the government, nothing's ever fast. Think DMV when you think about grants. Don't plan on doing this. This is not going to happen fast. And so it's great to plan way ahead, and if you have a supervisor or leadership, I'm thinking in higher education, sometimes depending on how much experience your president has with grant funding, they may or may not know how much time is needed to prepare. And so if you have leadership, there's another workshop that I do that talks about how to kind of work with your leadership to get them on board on how to support you as an employee or someone that they're working with in order to get yourself ready for grants. Guaranteed just because the work is good. So I will often find that nonprofits are like, this work is good, this work is great, it's doing such amazing things. Just because the work is good does not mean you're going to get funded. If the funder doesn't feel that what you're doing is sustainable, the way that you're running, they will also ask for your budgets. I've had nonprofits approach me that don't have budgets. If you don't have budgets, you are not ready for a grant application, right? And so just the work is more, you need to do more than good work. Your good work needs to be measured, you need to have assessments, and you need to be able to understand what is the impact What was the goal? Is all of this lining up in a way, if I was at work and I was doing an impact report and submitted it to my supervisor, you need that level of accountability with whatever you're doing in regard to writing grants. Okay, so why does funding look different now? So since January 2025, grant writing has completely changed. And when I went to the Grant Summit, they had the Grant Summit in DC back in the top of November, the Grant Professionals Association. That was the thing that we talked about most, speaking to how do we keep up with all of these changes when the changes literally keep happening every day. So why does the funding look different now? Public dollars are more competitive and more political. And so funders, the people who give the money, also have to be cautious of who they give the money to. So in instances, if you're on your social media publicly saying F ICE, and the funder is a part of this corporation where they get funding from Amazon, for example, but there have been instances where people don't get funded even though that they qualify. And so those are the kind of political games that are being played now. Is it correct? Is it ethical? Is it like the standard of how things should work? No, but that's the reality of what's happening now. And so the dollars are more competitive because you have to say what you're doing without saying what you're doing. You have to be able to say, I'm helping this community without saying you're helping this community, but say it in a way that you can still do what you need to do without putting the funder or yourself in jeopardy. It is a very much more complex roller coaster game that you have to play now. Funders want clear outcomes and stronger accountability. Again, this is a lot because of a lot of the political changes. There have been a lot of changes in where funding can be pulled, where it used to not be that funding could not be pulled in the way that we're seeing now. And so funders need to, now more than ever, clearer outcomes and clearer objectives so they can have, so if they ever do get attacked or someone does come to sue, because the day is not whether if, it's not when, if, it's when they're going to come knocking to sue if you're doing any kind of social justice work. They need to be armed with the data and with the numbers to be able to go to bat on your behalf and to continue to fund you. So it's to your benefit. Document, because it's not that these organizations don't want to fund you. It is a chess game that we're playing now, and how funders fund you and how you maintain your funding. Programs are being asked to do more with fewer resources. I talked a little bit about that earlier, about organizations closing. And then the relationship and strategy matter more than ever. And so, again, relationship building is going to be your best option. Chicago has a lot of high net worth funders. And so I would encourage you to get on Eventbrite, get on Meetup, get on LinkedIn, and find what are the different galas that are going on, the funders, and then funders follow the people that work at the foundation and see what they're posting on LinkedIn, because a lot of times they'll post that we're going to be going to this event or we're hosting this or that, and you can register to go. Sometimes there's things that's open to the public that maybe don't quite align, or maybe you don't quite need to go to that event, but it's an opportunity to meet, one of the funder leadership or something like that, or someone from the board. So who decides who gets grant funding? And so there's a few different agencies that decide. So first, government agencies. So you're thinking the federal government, state government, municipalities, on down the line. So all of those kind of grants can be found on grants.gov. The caveat to that is there are grants that historically have been dropped on grants.gov in 2023, 2022, and beyond, that there are millions and millions of dollars of grant applications that have not been made available since January 2025 due to current administration. So your government agencies, they are your number one main funder. They hold buckets of money. The Department of Education holds buckets of money. Department of Justice holds buckets of money. Each department holds buckets of money, and then they disperse those buckets of money to whichever. So Department of Education, they disperse to colleges, universities, high schools, middle schools, and manage all of the programs under that. And then you have foundations. Foundations are usually family founded and run, unless they've like been running for a while and maybe they've found someone, hired someone to come on and run it. The foundation grants are usually much simpler. They've gotten more complex in the last year, but these are grants that are a little bit simpler. These are grants can also be large. Like if you're looking at like the Chase Foundation, those larger foundations, they can give like $1 million grants and to match some of the federal dollars, just not in the same quantity that the federal departments can. So they can't give like $61 million grants, but maybe they can do, 20 as opposed to where the federal government can do maybe a few thousand, right? Most foundations do things within the 5 to 6 figure range, so you're thinking like 50, 100 to 500,000 foundations can provide grants for that. Those are great for, depending on what your budget is and what you're looking to do. Those are some great grants to go for that are middle of the road, and some great grants to start out with if you're just getting started. The next one are corporations, and so when you're thinking about like State Farm, Starbucks, these large for-profit organizations, all of them have a giving arm for tax purposes. And so Starbucks, for example, they have what's called the Schultz Foundation. It's called the Schultz Foundation because Schultz is the last name of the founders of Starbucks. The Schultz Foundation provides grant funding for, they have economic development grants, which those are some of the grants that I applied for a nonprofit that I work for. And so corporations, let's think about large corporations like that, find what their partnering foundation is, and you'll find a lot of grant opportunities for you there that you can apply for. And then getting to know those program officers. The program officers have a budget of money that they're supposed to give away every year. And so if you meet one of them and like become friends with one of them, that can turn into year over year consistent funding for you. And then high net worth individuals. So these are people that have an abundance of money and philanthropy is really important to them. They don't have a foundation, they don't have a nonprofit or anything like that. They just have a checkbook and they like to give checks. And so they also attend galas and all these different kind of networking events. So it's great to have a list of high net worth individuals that you're connected with that are in your network, but also can subsidize some of those other grant funding. So when foundation grants kind of maybe go down, you have some high net worth individuals that can kind of balance that out. So before I keep going, any questions so far? Sure.
So obviously what you're saying about federal grants is well known, obvious, apparently, but you're back in Illinois, so you may have noticed Illinois is not that, not buying into a lot of the things the federal government wants. So, if I'm applying for an Illinois state grant, I don't have to be careful.
No, not
BIPOC or equity or.
Yes, so for Illinois grants, you don't have to be as careful. However, the state has to be careful about what it does because of how things are. If we were playing, assume that we're not playing by the rules. So the state of Illinois still has to be mindful about what grant funding they give out because of how the federal government is behaving right now. That's a nice way I'll say that. But yes, you're also correct. The state of Illinois, I'm coming from Texas, and so what the state of Illinois is doing is drastically different than what the state of Texas is doing right now, which is a large part of the reason why I moved back to Chicago. Other questions? That was a great question. Awesome. Okay, we'll keep going. So the building blocks of grants, and so these are like the key essential things that you need to have when you're writing your grant that you'll have and you'll want to keep. Your executive summary. So your executive summary is a concise overview of your project. And so it's just like a preview of all of the different projects that you have going on. Yeah, go ahead and have a seat. Thank you. Are you here for the the workshop? Go ahead, have a seat.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, awesome. Go ahead.
English, my third language. But
Oh,
I speak English.
got it.
Slowly.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'm citizen. I'm very good.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. So, okay, so your executive summary is just an overview of your project. So think like an abstract when you were in college. This is just like a summary of what it is that your program is doing and how it operates. The next thing you're gonna have in there is your statement of need. So this is basically, why do you need the money? So what is the need? Do you need toilet paper? Do you need paper towels? Do you need facilities? Do you need like what? All the way down to the wire, what do you need? And this is where you're having a very clear budget helps a lot. Creating your budget helps like clear out the dust of what are the small integral things that you might miss, the micro things that you might miss that you need. Next, goals and objectives. And so I've harped on this a lot because this comes up again in your APR. And your APR, when you submit it to your funder and they read it, they can decide if they've signed a 3-year contract. If they don't like your annual performance report and they don't like how you handle their money, they cannot fund you, even though you have that 3-year. They can take that back. And so your goals and objectives section, you want to make sure those are realistic things that you can carry out because your funder is going to hold you to that. So your goals and objectives portion, you'll want to, you'll probably spend the most time on that with your team to make sure those are tight and clear. Next is your budget. So this is what I talked about, your budget. Having a clear budget on what it is that you're going to need, and then have a forecasting budget for the next 3 years. That helps you decide like what kind of funding are you going to need in the future, and it shows that your funder, that you're planning for the future, you're well organized. Evaluation budget, so measuring your success. So you want to be able to have, we talked about this a little bit, having an assessment, having your surveys. So having a pre-assessment, if that's appropriate for the kind of programming that you're doing, and a post-assessment. And if there's midterm assessments that you need in there, do those. If there's community assessments that you need, do those. Whatever kind of data collection you need to do, make sure that you're doing that and have that available before you start the grant application process. And then finally, organization background. Show your experience and capacity. So some grants will ask for your resume. Some grants will ask for, like, if you have multiple positions that you're gonna have, like say you're gonna have a director, 2 coordinators, and an administrative assistant, sometimes they'll ask for a copy of the resume for all of those people to see, do they have expertise in education in what it is that they say they're gonna do. So if you say that you're gonna have a counselor, is the counselor licensed? If you say that you're gonna have a career coach, does this person have experience in career coaching? So you want to make sure that you have your expertise is clear, and you may have a resume that's specifically for grant applications to make it clear to a funder what it is that you do. Because a resume for a job application, the person that you're applying to is also in your field, so they pretty much can kind of read your resume and know what's going on. I find that sometimes you have to redo your resume and make it a little more plain language what your expertise is, because a grant reviewer may not have the field knowledge to be able to really understand why you are the most qualified person for that. So I would have my leaders do a separate special resume and or cover letter for bonus points ready for when you're doing grant applications. So what makes funding decisions tip one way or another? So alignment. So a lot of times organizations will look at the dollar amount and be like, okay, $100,000, this is the grant that we need, we're gonna go for this. They don't always look at the mission alignment. Does the foundation that I'm looking to get this money from mission align with the mission of our organization? If they are like, we really want to help the puppies and you want to help grow trees, both of those are awesome, but there's no mission alignment there. So So you could apply for that and technically qualify and not get it because you didn't read the mission and there's no mission alignment. And so that's part of what people do, that what grant writers do, is we don't just look at we don't just write the grant. We go and review the website, review the funder, and that's also why getting to know the funder is so critical. You can really see, you can get more information by talking to the person about how they live out their mission to see if there's further mission alignment. Storytelling, so showing your organization unique impact. So share your unique story. So usually nonprofits are founded because the founder had an experience that was life-changing and they wanted to provide a solution to the problem that they faced, right? So you want to dig deep and be as authentic as possible. That's what's going to help you stand out, is sharing your story of why is this important? How did you start this? Why did you found this? If you are a part of a college or a freestanding institution that's applying for grants, dig into the story of how it was founded and how it applies to your personal life. Dig into the founding presidents or the founding board of directors, whoever those founding people were in the first 10 years of that organization. Dig into that and see how you can apply that to your life, and then you can interweave those into your grant application and make it more compelling and unique. Grant reviewers are great, are reading hundreds of grant applications a day, and you start to see the same words and same phrases over and over again. You need something that's going to stand out a little bit. Data. I have talked to y'all about data. We got it on data, right? Quantitative data. Get the data. If you don't have a CRM and you're working for a nonprofit, you need to have one. Spreadsheets are not sufficient enough, and spreadsheets can lie to you. I have both for my business. I have a CRM and I use spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are great for some things, they're not great for everything. Yeah. Sure.
Thank you so much. Can you explain, I understand it, but what does this mean, Polish? It means language or something else? Polish? It means language or something else?
Oh, it's this is grant. So this is all in English, and this is for a grant writing workshop.
So it's included this page?
Yes. Yes.
But it doesn't include the Polish language?
No.
Can you remember to explain what does it mean, Polish? Submit professional
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Oh, Polish. I got you. Okay. Polish. So you want to polish your grant application. So that's what it's saying. So you want to submit. So you want to submit a professional and error-free proposal, and so that's what they mean.
Why Polish?
Not Polish. So it's just spelled that way. So it's Polish, and then there's polish. So that's all that is.
It's different.
Yes, it's different.
Thank you.
No problem. So we were at budget anyway, so skipping down to polish. So you want to have a polished application, so meaning you want to check your eyes, dot your I's, cross your T's, making sure that it is a clean application. AI is in the conversation about grants, and so there have been a lot of things developed to detect if AI is being used in your application. There are a lot of grant reviewers that are like, in the grant world, they're very anti-AI right now. I have my own personal thoughts about that. I think that the conversation around AI sounds a lot like there's conversations around the 1995 computer. So I think that just, you're going to make yourself obsolete on purpose. I'm not going to do that. I've seen what has happened to folks that did not learn a computer. I'm going to learn AI. So, but right now with grant applications, you want to be careful about using ChatGPT and using AI to polish up your grant applications, because they are using different detectors to see if AI was used in your application. And so in cleaning up your application, a lot of people use, to polish it up, people will use ChatGPT just to like clean it up. You can end up getting booted for that because it went through an AI ChatGPT generator. So there's that to kind of be mindful of. But then that's also where your relationship with your funder is critical, because if you're having those conversations, you can ask your funder their stance on AI, and so you may be able to use AI using their application process, depending, especially if it's a foundation and they're smaller, they may allow you to use AI to just kind of clean up some stuff and not write the whole thing from scratch. So why organizations work with grant professionals? So this is kind of the question that I get, and then I also get questions kind of around like, how do I source out a grant writer? Grants are competitive and require strategy, not guesswork. And so a seasoned grant writer has a tried and true method of how they source applications, apply, submit, and the whole thing. We have a full routine of how we do that. The first time you do it, it is time consuming and stressful. If anybody's ever written a grant before, you're up till midnight, you're praying for a submission, you're praying that the portal doesn't crash. And so you want to have a grant professional that's available to help you create a strategy to getting the grant submitted successfully, and hopefully getting submitted like a week early so that you don't deal with portal crashes and things like that. Professionals understand funder priorities and timelines. And so funders are their own unique subset of individual. And so as a grant writer, it's our job to understand who are our funders and what are they looking for and how is that changing year to year, month to month. And particularly now in this administration, funders have changed in a variety of ways, and kind of depending on where they stand on, depending on that side of which side of the fence they stand on, depends on what changes they've made for the good or for the better. And so grant professionals have invested time, money, and resources into tracking those different changes. Strong applications tell clear, compelling stories with data. So you can tell data is important to me. We make sure that there's data incorporated in there, but not just data for the sake of data's sake, but data that breathes more life into the narrative of the grant application. And then compliance reporting. As a grant writer, I have done writing grants, and then writing APRs, writing the reports are two totally, completely skill sets. I've had the unique opportunity to not just write grants, but manage grants. And when you're managing the grants, that's when you have to start writing and submitting those APRs. And so having someone on your team that understands compliance and understands reporting is a key metric in the success of your grant. So you want to have someone on your team that understands how to do those things. So these are lessons from my first TRIO SSS grant application. So during the pre-award process, like I said, I was working under this grant, TRIO SSS, and I got, basically my director came into a meeting one day and said, hey, we're going to be rewriting this grant. We have to reapply or we're not going to have jobs in the next year. And so part of the federal regulation is that you can't write a federal grant while you're also being paid by that grant. And so you had to work on writing that grant off of work hours. And so we had to write the grant at home, after hours, and all kinds of things like that. And so that was obviously stressful because I would like to keep my job, but I also had to still do my regular job and write this grant. What I found out later is that leadership had offered my director to hire a grant writer to write this grant on our behalf, and we would just provide the information to that grant writer. My director was prideful and wanted to write it himself because he had written it previously and gotten awarded and wanted to have another award under his belt again. The consequences of that is that myself and the rest of the team were so stressed and stretched thin that we had a 0% retention rate of our staff, and all of our staff left that position. So even though the grant was awarded and we had our jobs secured for 2020, 2025, all of us applied for jobs and got jobs elsewhere, and they had to restaff that entire department. All because of the stress of trying to manage, operate, work within, and write the grant all at once. And so I created this one for a conference that I presented at that had a lot of college and university leadership there, and a lot of times they need to hear this because they will just say, duties as assigned, you go ahead and write the grant, you're also a coordinator and have to do these programming things, but you have a degree and you know how to write papers, so you should be able to write. That is a very ignorant stance on grant writing, and that is how you apply for a whole bunch of grants and then don't get awarded and you're wondering why. Grants are, people have full departments, and so a grant writing is not a duties as assigned thing. But often, grants are being written by people who are duties as assigned, voluntold to do that. And so the lesson that I try to tell leadership is that it is worth the investment to hire a professional if you don't have a grant department, because what you'll end up doing is securing the grant but losing the people that are able to manage it. And finding people that are skilled enough to manage a grant is a completely different skill from finding someone to write the grant. And also it's more expensive to find, to do the job search and find those people. So that's a lesson that I like to tell, to just kind of share with people if I ever have leaders in the audience. So we're going to do grant language and then skip over to Q&A for the sake of time. So grant language you need to recognize. Funder, I talked about funder a lot. Funder is just is referring to the individual or individuals that have the money to give. So the funder is the person with the check that can give you the check. The funder could be federal organization, government organization, nonprofit, foundation, high net worth individual, but anybody or any institution that has the ability to hand over the check and call it a grant. Eligibility. So who can and cannot apply? There's a phrase on here that I missed. RFP, request for proposal. An RFP, or a request for proposal, is a document that is pretty much the funder saying, hey y'all, we have this money, we would like to give it out. Here are all of the things you need to do to get this money. Here's when the application is due. Here's when the application drops. Here are the requirements. Here are the objectives. It can be, sometimes it's a PDF that's like 17 pages long. It has everything that you would need to know about that specific grant. So you read your RFP, and in the RFP is where you'll find the eligibility. You'll find eligibility requirements, and you'll have to skip down. So say you skip down to page 8, and then you look and see that one requirement down at the bottom makes you ineligible. Great. You don't have to do anything else. Don't try to draft anything, because I've seen this happen. Some people will start drafting stuff, but they didn't read the eligibility, and they're not even eligible for the grant. They're halfway done writing it. So reading the eligibility part is key. And so when people are talking about, or when you go into a workshop or a presentation or talking to a funder and they're talking about eligibility, this is what they mean. Allowable cost. So allowable costs it's exactly what it sounds like, costs that are allowable. So if you allowed to use this grant funding to spend it on these things. TRIO SSS, a great example. In TRIO SSS, an unallowable cost is food. So you can't purchase pizza, you can't purchase snacks. So we're running a student organization, we're serving 250 students, we're having programs multiple times a week. And we are not allowed to use the grant funding to purchase snacks for our students, right? That makes 0 sense. However, you need to know that about your grant. So if you go buy a few boxes of pizza for your students, understanding what your allowable costs are will prevent you from potentially losing funding in the future. Match cost sharing. Beware of match cost sharing grants. These are like municipal grants, sometimes foundation grants, where basically they're like, yeah, we have $1 million that we're going to give out to these organizations doing that at a match or cost share. Basically a reimbursement style grant, where you have to have the $1 million to front to do all of that, and then you send that over to them, and then they reimburse you every single time you do something. So they don't give you the $1 million. You have to have $1 million in the bank, or be able to acquire $1 million in your fiscal year. Spend it on whatever it is you want to spend it on. Send them the invoice, and then when they decide to write the check, send it to you, and then you get your money. So these cost sharing match grants are not great for organizations that are already strapped for funding. And it's sometimes very small in the RFP, and so you want to be aware when you see match or cost sharing grants, because that's what that means. If you don't have those dollars in the bank already, even if you qualify and get the grant, those dollars are pretty much not usable. Outcomes. And so outcomes, this is when I talked about reporting and APRs and that kind of stuff. So you have your objectives, and then at the end of you got the money, you've done the stuff, what was the outcome of all of the things that you did? And then being able to say 67% of students were able to graduate from the community college, or 27% of students knew about more about financial literacy after the end of, you know, whatever. So being able to have those outcomes, and then reporting. I've talked about reporting and data go hand in hand. There are some federal grants that have specific separate trainings just on the reporting piece. There are some government agencies that have software specifically for you to be able to spit out the APR in the format that the government, the Department of Education, Department of Justice wants you to spit it out in. And so when they're talking, so if you go to a conference or you go to a presentation and you're talking with funders, when they're talking about reporting, that's what they mean. A great question to ask when you're talking to a funder is, what does your reporting look like? Or what are your reporting expectations? That way you know, hey, if you give me money, this is how much reporting I'm going to have to do. Is it a yearly thing? Every 2 months? Quarterly? What is it? And then last, common myths about funding, about block funding. So only big organizations get grants. That's not true. Organizations of any size can get grants as long as you are on top of your grant business. You need a nonprofit to apply. You do not. There are a lot of different types of organizations that can apply for grants. Education, I talked about, is one of them. There are grants for small for-profit businesses. Again, they are the smaller category, but those grants do exist. And there are corporations that are doing their part to make those grants more abundant, to try to combat what's happening with our federal dollars. Grants are free money. We talked about that. I won't go over that again, but grants are not free money because you do have to invest time and or money to get those. You need perfect data to apply. You do not. I've harped on data a lot, but your data does not need to be perfect. It just needs to exist. And if you need to improve upon it, just improve upon it every year. No data is perfect. There is no such thing as perfect data. So you don't need perfect, like scientific, Ivy League level data, but you do need some level of tracking to show funders you're not just out here just spending money. There's a tried true method to it. And if we weren't funded once, we won't be funded again. That is a common misconception. If you apply for a grant and you get denied, that can actually be your foot in the door. Because they've already read your application, they kind of already know who you are, ask for feedback. That's an excuse for you to talk to the funder and maybe get a meeting with them. I have seen so many nonprofits get funded the second or the third application because they reached out to the funder. So if they didn't, and also you might find out you weren't denied because your application wasn't good. You might have just been up against somebody who was just as good, but they've applied 3 times, and so they just gave it to them this time. So you be the one that applied the 3 times, and they can give it to you this next time. So yeah, if you get denied, use that as your golden ticket, foot in the door. All right, cool, we in here, you know my name, so I'm gonna just keep knocking until you say yes. I mean, I feel like take the Jordan approach. Like Michael Jordan was not. He was like historically not good at basketball. He was just not, and he worked really hard to become good. Like he was not the star player. He was not, things was not laid out for him. He earned his way through there. So with these funders, if you get denied, apply the Michael Jordan approach. Just keep going until like you're the #1 and everybody's talking about you for the rest of your life. Okay. Thank you. Q&A. Thank you. You all are a great audience. I love the eye contact, and I know it's late and y'all tired, but y'all stayed with me. I appreciate it. So questions?